People who had someone condescendingly explain something that they didn't know you're an expert on. What happened? Someone told me they could weld copper to steel. I have forgotten more about my trade over the years than most people would ever know. A flat earther tried to pull the "so you think it was easier to get to the moon than fake the footage?" As a professional VFX artist that knows very much about visual manipulation technology of the past and present, in my professional opinion, yes. A program manager who developed an half-back DevOps stack tried to explain to a room full of cloud architects, senior cloud architects, directors, VP of Cloud and the Global Enterprise VP of Cloud, how cloud work and how we don't understand services in the cloud. It didn't go well for him. Not exactly this, but when I was working part-time at Target I had a customer beam me out and saying how I'll amount to nothing. I just looked at her and said I graduate with my master's in aerospace engineering next month. She left real quick. So I'm 22, working in the trades while I'm in school for CS. I'm making decent money, more than most of the people I know at my age. On multiple occasions, I've had people say to their kids, you don't want to be like that when you grow up. They're making minimum wage doing hard labor. LOL nah. I just made $300 in a single day painting a basement. When the rotted P-trap under my sink broke, my boyfriend said, remind me to take a look at that. I asked why. He said, so I can tell you what parts to buy. I thanked him and reminded him that I'd installed all the plumbing at my mother's house. He knew that, but I guess he'd forgotten. Rotted P-trap under my sink. I read this as under my skin and I was super concerned for a minute. So background, I'm a competitive rock climber. One day a few college-age guys came into the gym I train at and clearly thought they were hot crap. They knew a handful of climbing specific vernacular and that was it. They, however, thought they could help me on a route I was on. I wasn't just climbing, I was doing a sort of exercise, but they were oblivious to that. The two guys kept talking about what I should do. I kept nodding and saying okay. Then things turned. One of the guys said, hey, don't feel bad though. Girls just aren't good at rock climbing. And that was some balls. I waited about an hour till they were working on one specific route and asked if I could hop in. The same guy as earlier was like, don't feel bad if you can't get it. This one's hard. I flew up it. The guy just stood there baffled. I just walked away. That might be the most technically balanced and flawless climbing I have ever done. I have a PhD in chemistry, but I also look like a dirty hippie, so this happens pretty frequently unfortunately. The best was my mom's boyfriend trying to tell me that C and sugar are basically the same thing because they have the same number of carbon and oxygen atoms. They don't BTW. Instead of just laughing in his face, I tried to explain that the way atoms in molecules are connected to one another plays a huge role in the properties of that molecule. He then told me that the university had brainwashed me. That's when I laughed in his face. I was hired as an Excel consultant. The person that hired me at one point taught me how to do something in Excel. I just sat there in disbelief until she finished. Oddly, I understood it immediately and had no questions. I did my apprenticeship as a hotel specialist. Here in Germany, I'm far away from being an expert on wine, whiskey and other alcoholic drinks, but I have pretty solid knowledge how they're made, how to decide what wine goes well with what kind of food and so on. Countless times I had arrogant snobs in front of me that wanted to show off in front of friends or their girl. One of my absolute favorite was a guy with his female colleague and he had the authority to sign the bills for their stay. After he started off with a lot of nonsense, he asked what grapes were used for the wine. He just said the grape to me, because he couldn't differentiate between the wine's name and the grapes. So I just repeated it. After that he asked me what's the second one. After a bit of confusion and chit chat, it turned out the guy thought that rose wine is just a mix of red and white wine. The best part was the girl told me the next day that she grew up in one of the biggest wine growing districts here and almost her whole family works in the business. The wine was still good and expensive enough to keep her mouth shut. My ex-boss sent me a white paper saying this is what you should be doing instead of what you are doing now. White paper listed my personal work website as the second reference. I had someone cite and link an article I wrote about First Amendment issues. Thinking incorrectly, it rebutted what I was saying, not realizing I was the one who wrote the article. With the Cox internet, tech was trying to blame my bad internet on Wi-Fi being imperfect and speeds and loss vary on conditions and location and other measurable factors, etc. So I played along and went, huh, what about hardwired to router? Yep, same issues can occur. Huh, I own an ISP in California. I've been a tech for 27 years. Ethernet is not Wi-Fi, pal. Let him go all in, then drop the truth. Told him to not assume by using industry-only jargon. It will make your lack of experience and professionalism invisible. Oh, so now you're gonna escalate that trouble at the head end? Told him to not assume by using industry-only jargon. It will make your lack of experience and professionalism invisible. People sometimes throw jargon around to make it sound like they know what they're talking about, and it's so obvious to anyone who knows anything about the field. I was invited to dinner at someone's home and there was a grand piano there. Guests were trying to play badly, to the point the host closed the piano and said, "If you can play Chopin's Military March, then you're allowed to play. I'm a piano teacher and this song is not difficult." I sat at the bench and this lady stopped me before I lifted the lid. I looked at her and said, "Chopin's Military March, Opus 40, number 1. In A major." Right, she gave me a humph and said, "Let's see you play it." I played the whole piece, with all the repeats. Didn't miss a note. That time someone called out Tom Morello for being another musician who instantly became a political expert on Twitter. And Tom Morello fired back a response about his Harvard honors degree in policy. That was tight. Not an expert, but I once had an argument with an ex who was trying to convince me that ponies were just baby horses. For 30 minutes. He knew my life at that time revolved around the equine species. Apparently he knew better than me, however. I take shift serving in the taproom to make extra money and keep my ear to the ground, so to speak. My personal favorite are the guys, usually extract homebrewers, who somehow try to impress and belittle me at the same time by arguing with me about beers I literally developed the recipe for, brewed, and babysat all the way to the tap. Most recent went something like this. "Well, I'm leaning toward the blonde, but this IPA is really great. Single malt, Simcoe hops, am I right? Yeah, they're all the rage nowadays, but I've been brewing them at home for years. Right on, man. Nice to meet the competition. Haha. Glad you like the IPA. The malt bill is actually pretty diverse. Some special beer Munich for flavor, some oats and wheat to round it out. No Simcoe in this one actually, but you're probably picking up some citrusy tropical notes from the Calypso and Galaxy in the Whirlpool. That's gotta be a different beer. I know Simcoe when I taste it, and this is Simcoe. I've been brewing with it for years. One time I won an award for my Simcoe beer. Maybe you ought to learn more about the beers you're serving so you can keep up in conversations with real beer nerds like me. Hey, sweetheart, cool, will do. One of the big ISPs hired a company to write new software for them, essentially to replace the stuff that had been running everything since the mid-late 80s. Honestly heard it has some late 70s roots, but I never looked into it. Anyways, years later they finish and come to present their new software to us. It is crap. Like worse than crap. It is just a front end to the current software and not even a good front end. You need to go into the old software 90% of the time. In fact, it was so bad it doubled or tripled the work needed to complete tasks, because you had to swap between it, the old software, and a third piece of software. I wrote a massive explanation an hour after the presentation of everything wrong and why we should not use it. We went live with it 3 weeks later. 7 years later they finally gave up on the software. I had left the company long ago, but my buddy was in the meeting discussing getting rid of it, and gave them a massive "I told you so" delivered from you Origin's past self. By comparing my 7-year-old email, which listed all current and future issues with the software and only took me 4 hours to discover, and compared it with their charts, reports, and graphs over 7 years and dozens of teams and thousands of employees to discover, I had nailed every single possible point. He said, even just being the proxy to show them my email felt so good. A yard guy kept insisting that Virginia creeper is poison ivy. I'm a landscape architect. I took 3 semesters just in identifying plant materials. I know the difference between Virginia creeper and poison ivy. I don't know if I'm well versed enough to be classed as an expert as such, but I am a biologist, and I quite regularly get ridiculous long-winded explanations from family members about how some aspect of human biology works that they've gotten from some naturopath blog and the like, personal favorite being the one that stated transgender people were a result of female DNA and vaccine. If I correct them, they usually aren't pleased, and they genuinely seem to struggle with the idea that any scientist, not just me, could know more than their favorite anti-vax blogger. Lawyer here. One of my clients showed me a court ruling and demanded I started the same proceeding for him. Tried to explain that there were several reasons why it would not work for him and proposed a different route. He insisted his case was exactly the same and it would be an easy win. I tried to explain again. He says, well, what do you know about it? Look at that ruling again. See who's listed as the plaintiff's lawyer? Oh, that was delicious. One of the first times I worked out in a new gym, I had some guy try to tell me how I was doing an exercise wrong. I wasn't. After listening to his very poor explanation of how to do it right, of which he still was incorrect, I set him straight, broke down his biomechanics of why he was wrong, dropped some more science on him, and then informed him that not only did I have a master's in exercise science, I was a certified personal trainer and trained military for a living. Bottom line, just because I'm a girl in a gym, don't assume I don't know what I'm doing. What's that on your necklace? It's a neuron. That's not what a neuron looks like. Yes, it is. No, it's not. I am a neurobiology major. I feel like if someone is wearing a neuron on a necklace, you should assume they probably know something about neurons. Went to a boxing class. One of the new, I noticed by his experience, guys started teaching me how to jab right off the bat and I just went with it. Then started teaching me how to move, etc. I never asked him to, he approached me and just started. Then came sparring and I beat the crap out of him. That's when he found out he probably should have asked if I boxed before. I've been working in kitchens for over 20 years. Had an owner recently, who wasn't the person that hired me, his executive chef did. Take one look at me, and since I have a lot of tattoos and had a beard at the time, decided because of my looks that I obviously know nothing about cooking and whatnot. It made work heck for me. Note, this owner had never once worked a day in a restaurant or kitchen and thought he knew everything because he watched the Food Network. His restaurant lost over $1 million that he put into it because of his idiot mismanagement. All of us in the kitchen had more years of accumulated experience than he had been alive, yet he didn't want anything to do with any of our suggestions. I don't know if I'm an expert, but I do have a master's in biostatistics and I did my research in survey methodology for a national health survey. Had someone try to explain to me that all surveys are bulls, basically, and that they shouldn't be used in scientific research. It basically boiled down to him not understanding what representative samples are and also thinking that most people who take surveys just lie for the heck of it and can't possibly be telling the truth, I guess. I pretty much just let him go on being wrong after a couple comments back and forth because I got bored with arguing. He couldn't come up with a better alternative though, so I like to think I won. I don't know if it's fair to say you won. Your sample size is 1 and you haven't given us your margin for error. My 7th grade science teacher asked the class if it were possible for a man to pee with an erection, and I raised my hand and answered yes. She said no, and that it is physically impossible to do this. Like I don't do this every morning. I had to ask my friends afterward to make sure I wasn't some sort of mutant, because nobody else said anything. Had a professor explain the pathogenicity of C. albicans to me. She prefaced it with, I'll put this in terms maybe you can understand. I've got my master's from a lab who was studying that. My thesis is 200 pages with the name and the title, and a cell paper. Let me put this in terms that maybe you can understand. That professor is a dipshit. Shepherd here. I've had someone try to tell me that a ram is a male deer, and not a male sheep, and was routinely calling me stupid and that it was common knowledge. Don't know how I had the strength to argue. Just Tuesday my boss yelled at me for using the tabla saw since he didn't think I'd been trained on it. I reminded him that I used to run a carpentry shop, taught high schoolers how not to lose fingers, and I have one in my garage right now. I want to believe that it's because I am a painter and not because I'm a woman that he said that, but you should probably let that high schooler out of your garage. My former roommate studied psychology and was in the midst of conducting a scientific study on people's religious beliefs and how those beliefs correlate with their hopefulness. My sister and her boyfriend visited us. Over dinner, the boyfriend asked my roommate about her work. My roommate briefly summarized her research, elevator pitch style. This guy, who not only had never even taken an intro class in psychology, proceeded to explain to her that her study was flawed. It wasn't, because, apparently, in his opinion, the only way to experience hope is believing in God just like he does, a notion disproved by the research study and being a reasonable person. He rejected out of hand anything she said that was science related at all. And my sister proceeded to marry and procreate with him. I'm an optician. I had a patient who told us he was a doctor and allowed us to assume he was an eye doctor because he was writing his own glasses RXs. We remade them over and over again because he couldn't see out of his no-line bifocals. I asked him a few questions. He was having trouble reading, had to tilt his head back. I told him I wanted to adjust his glasses so they sat higher up on his face so he could more naturally look at the reading card and see if the glasses RXs was good or not. He yells, "You don't understand. I've had surgery for an eye disease you have never heard of before," and went on about how it shouldn't matter how they sit. The RXs is good so it should be good no matter where he looks. That's the opposite of reality. Any eye doctor would know this. A no-line bifocal has your distance RX at the top of the lens and slowly changes into a reading RX as you go towards the bottom. Many times if someone can't read clearly it's because they're looking too high up in their lens. Moving the frame up allows them better access to the bottom of the lens. So I told him if he didn't want me to adjust them then he can take them home to try to get used to it. He came back the next day. An older co-worker gently chewed him out and told him I was right and was trying to help him. The next time I saw him he apologized. Turns out he is a lung doctor. I was coordinating the installation of close to 2,000 TVs on a cruise ship. One particular install was tricky because it was in a tight space and all the screens were too large. So I ducked out to a big box store to pick up a smaller screen. The salesman was explaining how difficult it is to install plasma screens. This was a number of years ago, and that I need to hire one of their experts who know which specific monster cable to use for optimal viewing. He kept coming out with a bunch of outright bulls to try and upsell me. I ended up saying something to the effect of, "Listen mate, I've installed more TVs than you've had hot dinners, so kindly ring up just the TV so I can be on my way." I regularly listen to friends of friends talk about how much they hate insurance companies, and then I listen and then advise them I was an adjuster and walk through their claim and then tell them how to do it differently next time. This usually ends with people gaining further understanding, or I lose respect because I worked for the big, bad insurance companies. I was actually on the opposite end of this. I met up with some friends I knew and a few people I didn't know were there. One of them talked a lot and interrupted quite a bit, so he was getting on my nerves. My friend said she didn't feel good and she thought she was getting a sinus infection. The loud guy interrupts her mid-sentence and says you don't have a sinus infection while rolling his eyes. I piped up and said, "Thanks for the advice, doctor." To which he said, "You know I am a doctor, right?" Nope I did not. He might have been a doctor but he was still a dong. I'm a younger guy in my office, but the industry itself is young enough that I have more experience than many of my co-workers, since I've been here since about the beginning. Anyhow, I'm accustomed to older co-workers assuming my age makes me less qualified to talk about certain matters. One amusing incident occurred when a co-worker I don't get on all that well was suggested during conversation that I attend an upcoming seminar at the local community college that was basically intro to blue suede knick-knack 81's industry. I told him I thought it looked interesting and I would go if he did, and he agreed. 3 weeks later, I kept my word. I was the presenter. Back over the summer, my wife and I had a cookout and, as we do sometimes, we invited some of the neighbors, including a family who had just moved in a few weeks before. As we're all hanging out, my wife noticed the wife of the new family was constantly on the phone, so she asked if everything was okay. The woman explained that her father had suffered a heart attack a few nights before and that her mother was just keeping her in the loop. She then said they were also looking into legal action of some kind because her father had several broken ribs after the heart attack and that someone must have been too rough on him. At that point, my wife said, "I don't think it's that they were too rough on him. If they had to perform CPR, it's highly likely that is when his ribs got broken. It's unfortunate, but statistically, broken or cracked ribs happen about 30-40% of the time." The woman looked at my wife and said, "I don't need your opinion or some factoid you picked up while surfing the internet." My wife kinda shrugged and said, "Actually, I didn't read that on the internet. It's a fact that I learned when I was doing my training to become a paramedic and they told us it would happen. It still scared the heck out of me the first time it happened though, and I still whisper I'm sorry when it happens to this day 15+ years later." After confirming with several other people there that my wife is, indeed, a 15+ year paramedic and knew what she was talking about, she apologized for her snippy answer and said she was just stressed out. Good for her. Become friends with her. She seems like a good person. I have a friend who can't ever be wrong about anything. Not even when I show her multiple websites that clearly state Titan is a moon of Saturn. Wendy. Got. I am a woman, and I work outdoor pursuits. I had a guy in my group of guests think I was another guest at one point, because that group was early, and I wasn't wearing my high visibility top that identifies guides and group leaders. He showed me how to rig up a climbing line. He was full of confidence, but dangerously wrong. He tried to run the carabiner upside down for a start. When I pointed this out, and informed him I was the group instructor, he went quiet whilst I undid his ropes, and then didn't say much for the rest of the trip. A woman at a snooty scholarship dinner was telling me how she was doing the boot camp type workouts and they are exactly like what they do in the US Army and just as difficult. I was fine with her thinking that, but I mentioned it's easy to work out hard for 1 hour and then go home to a warm house. She said, "What do you even know about it? Did you get second-hand info from your boyfriend?" I asked her to open her event program as I was key speaker on female veteran post-military experiences and my topic was lack of visibility of the female veteran. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.